The night began with the sound of rain striking against the windows. Claire had just settled on the couch with a book, the fire crackling in front of her, when she heard a sudden knock at the door. It startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. The storm outside was heavy, the kind of storm that made the whole town quiet. For a moment she hesitated, unsure of who would be out in such weather. But when she opened the door, the last person she thought she would see was standing there, her cousin's teenage son. Ethan. He looked soaked from the rain, his hair damp and falling into his eyes, his backpack hanging from one shoulder. He offered a shy, almost uncertain smile. "Hi, Aunt Claire. Mom said it would be okay if I stayed here tonight. She had to work late and Dad's out of town." His voice was polite but carried a nervous edge, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. Claire blinked in surprise. She hadn't seen Ethan in months, maybe longer. And in her memory, he was still a boy who laughed too loud and asked endless questions. But now, in the doorway, he looked older, taller, his shoulders broader. Time had moved forward quietly. She realized she had missed the moment when he stopped being a child and started becoming a young man. "Of course." "Ethan," she said warmly, stepping aside. "Come in before you catch cold." He walked in, leaving a trail of raindrops on the floor. Claire noticed how he glanced around her living room, almost as if seeing it for the first time. Even though he had been there many times when younger, there was a stillness in him now. A quietness that hadn't been there before. As she closed the door, Claire felt something stir inside her, something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't wrong and it wasn't inappropriate. It was just a strange awareness that this boy she once knew had stepped into a new stage of life. And she couldn't ignore the change. The fireplace glowed warmly, and Claire guided him toward it. "You must be cold. Sit down. I'll make you something hot to drink." Ethan nodded, sitting carefully on the edge of the couch, his backpack resting by his feet. He rubbed his hands together as if trying to bring warmth back into his skin. In the kitchen, Claire quickly prepared hot chocolate, her mind racing. She tried to push away the odd flutter in her chest, telling herself it was nothing, only surprise at how grown Ethan looked. When she returned with 2 steaming mugs, Ethan's eyes lit up with genuine gratitude. "Thanks, Aunt Claire," he said, wrapping his hands around the cup. His voice was deeper than she remembered, still carrying youth but edged with something more. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the storm outside. The rain pounded on the roof and thunder rolled in the distance, but inside the fire gave a soft comfort. Claire glanced at him and saw the way the firelight reflected in his eyes. He looked thoughtful, lost in his own world, as though he carried things he didn't say out loud. She broke the silence. "So, how have you been? It's been a while." Ethan gave a small smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Busy, I guess. School's been a lot. Mom's been working a lot, too. I don't really see her much during the week." He paused, then shrugged as if brushing off the weight of what he had just admitted. "But I'm okay." Claire's heart tightened. She had always known Ethan to be cheerful, full of energy. But now there was something quieter in him, something that hinted at loneliness. She wanted to ask more, but she didn't want to push. Instead, she nodded and said, "Well, tonight you don't have to worry about anything. Just relax. This house is yours too." Ethan's eyes softened at her words. "Thanks. I needed that." The two continued talking, the conversation easy but filled with little pauses that said more than words. Ethan spoke about his love for photography, about how he wanted to capture the world in pictures because sometimes he couldn't find the right words. Claire listened carefully, realizing she had never heard him speak with so much depth before. He wasn't just passing through his teenage years. He was already searching for meaning, already trying to understand himself. The more he spoke, the more Claire felt an unexpected connection. It wasn't about age or family ties. It was about the way he expressed things she remembered feeling when she was young. That longing to be seen, to be understood, to be taken seriously. As the clock ticked on and the storm grew heavier outside, Claire found herself studying him in moments when he wasn't looking. His expressions, the way he leaned forward when he was excited, the way his voice softened when he spoke about things that mattered to him. She wasn't thinking of him as her cousin's son anymore. She was seeing him as Ethan, an individual with his own world of thoughts and emotions. The fire crackled louder, filling the silence after his words. Claire realized that this night, this unexpected visit, was something more than just offering shelter to a relative. It was a chance encounter that stirred old feelings in her feelings about growing older, about time slipping away, about how life surprised you when you least expected it. When Ethan excused himself to change into dry clothes, Claire stood alone in the living room, staring into the fire. Her chest felt tight, not with fear, but with something more complicated. She whispered to herself, "Why does this feel different?" She didn't have an answer. Moments later, Ethan returned wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants. His hair was still damp, but his smile was lighter now. He looked at her and said, "Thanks again, Aunt Claire. I didn't know where else to go tonight, but being here, it feels better." Claire nodded, her throat dry. She wanted to tell him how much his words meant, how much it mattered that he felt safe with her. Instead, she just smiled and said, "I'm glad you're here too." The rain kept falling, the storm raged outside, but inside something quiet and unspoken settled between them. Claire didn't know what the night would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. This was not going to be an ordinary evening. Something had shifted, and there was no going back. The storm grew heavier as the night deepened. The wind pressing against the windows, thunder rolling through the quiet house. Claire and Ethan sat near the fireplace, the orange glow casting soft shadows on their faces. A blanket of warmth wrapped the room, though the silence between them felt alive. Filled with thoughts neither had spoken yet. Ethan sipped his hot chocolate, his hands cupped around the mug. He looked older in that moment, his features sharpened by the flickering light. Claire studied him discreetly, still trying to adjust to the fact that the little boy she once knew was gone. In his place was someone on the verge of adulthood, uncertain but thoughtful, carrying emotions far too heavy for his age. "You always liked the fire," Claire said gently, trying to ease the silence. "I remember when you were small. You'd sit here for hours just staring at it." Ethan smiled faintly. "I still do that, I guess. It's calming. The world feels quieter when I look at flames, like everything slows down." He paused, then added, "Sometimes it's the only time I feel at peace." His words surprised her. Claire leaned back in her chair, listening with more focus now. "You don't feel that way often?" Ethan shrugged, staring into the fire as if the flames might give him answers. "Not really. School's noisy. People are noisy. Everyone wants something from U grades, sports, being social. But it feels like no one really cares about what you actually think. They just want you to fit in." Claire felt her chest tighten at his honesty. She had been there once, in that same confusing stage of life where expectations pressed down harder than anyone realized. She knew the loneliness that came with it, the desire to be seen and understood. "I get that," she said softly. "When I was your age, I felt invisible too. Like I was in a room full of people, but no one noticed who I really was. It's hard, isn't it?" Ethan turned his head and looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of surprise and relief, as if her words had lifted something off his shoulders. "Exactly," he said. "That's exactly how it feels." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The crackle of the fire was the only sound, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as though silence itself was letting them breathe. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Sometimes I think maybe I'm just not enough. Not good enough at sports, not smart enough, not whatever people want me to be. And it's exhausting, always trying to measure up." Claire's heart ached at the confession. She reached over without thinking, her hand resting gently on his. It was a simple gesture, filled not with explanation, but with reassurance. Ethan looked down at their hands, then back at her, his eyes reflecting something fragile yet strong. "You are enough," she said firmly. "More than enough. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone. The right people will see you for who you are, and they'll never forget it." For the first time that evening, Ethan's face softened with something that looked almost like hope. "You really think so?" he asked, his voice uncertain, almost like a child again. "I know so," Claire replied, her voice steady. He held her gaze, and the room seemed to shrink as if only the two of them existed. The storm outside faded into the background. Claire felt her heart beating faster, but she stayed calm, not wanting to pull away from the moment. She could see his longing, his desire to be understood, to feel seen. And she realized she was giving him that not as a parent or as a relative, but as someone who simply cared about the person he was becoming. They sat like that for a while, their hands still touching. It wasn't about romance, and it wasn't about family. It was about connection pure. The house was quiet now, the storm outside beginning to fade into a softer drizzle. Claire walked through the hallway after saying good night to Ethan, her footsteps slow, her heart still unsettled. She pushed open the door to the guest room and checked everything once more, fluffing the pillows, making sure the lamp worked. Adjusting the blanket, she wanted it to feel warm, safe, and welcoming. Yet, while her hands moved, her thoughts refused to stay still. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face in the firelight. The way he had looked at her, grateful, searching, almost vulnerable. It wasn't the gaze of a child anymore, and that truth shook her in ways she couldn't explain. She reminded herself over and over that this was just a boy staying the night, her cousin's son, nothing more. But her heart didn't listen to reason. It kept replaying the quiet weight of his words, the depth in his voice, the softness in his smile. After settling him into the guest room, Claire retreated to her own bedroom. She changed into her nightgown, brushed her hair, and slipped beneath the covers, but sleep would not come. The rain tapping at the window should have soothed her, but instead, it matched the rhythm of her racing thoughts. She thought of Ethan sitting by the fire, his hands wrapped around the cup of hot chocolate, speaking about his fears of not being enough. How many times had she felt that same fear? How many nights had she wished someone would just tell her she mattered? And tonight, she had been that person for him. That realization filled her with a tender ache. Turning onto her side, Claire hugged her pillow. Why does it feel so different? She asked herself. She had cared for Ethan all his life, but tonight there was a new awareness. She saw him not just as family, but as a person carrying his own burdens, his own quiet strength. And it awakened something in her. Something she hadn't felt in years, the memory of being young, of longing to connect, of wanting someone to see the hidden parts of her heart. Meanwhile, in the guest room, Ethan lay awake as well. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint creaks of the old house and the soft roll of thunder far in the distance. His mind spun with everything that had happened earlier. He had not expected Claire to understand him the way she did. With most adults, he felt judged or dismissed. But with her, he felt heard. And that feeling was rare, almost unbelievable. He thought of the moment her hand touched his. It had been brief, simple, but it stayed with him now, echoing in his chest. No one had ever looked at him like she did, with such compassion. As if she could see past the surface straight into who he really was. He didn't know what it meant, and maybe he was too young to understand. But it mattered more than anything else in that moment. Back in her room, Claire turned over again, restless. She told herself it was foolish to think so much that tomorrow everything would go back to normal. Ethan would go home, life would continue, and this night would be nothing more than a passing memory. But part of her didn't want it to be just that. Part of her wanted to hold on to the way his presence filled the house. It's the way he made her feel less alone. She rose quietly, walking to the window. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the moon peeked through thin clouds, casting a silver light over the street. The world felt calm now, but inside her, a storm still stirred. She pressed her hand against the glass, whispering, "What am I doing?" The night stretched on, and neither of them found rest easily. Ethan finally rolled onto his side, pulling the blanket tighter around himself. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Claire's words. "You are enough." No one had said that to him in such a way before, not even his parents. It was as if she had seen through every doubt he carried and spoken directly to the part of him that needed healing. For Claire, the hours passed with quiet turmoil. She lay awake, her heart heavy with emotions she couldn't name. She felt protective of Ethan, but also drawn to the honesty he had shown her. It was a rare kind of connection, the kind people searched years for, and it had arrived at her door unexpectedly. Carried in by the storm, sometime past midnight. She got up again and walked to the hallway, barefoot, her nightgown brushing against her legs. She hesitated outside the guest room door. She almost knocked, almost checked if he was asleep, but stopped herself. It wasn't right. He needed rest, and she needed distance. With a deep breath, she turned back to her room, though her heart pounded as if she had just crossed a dangerous line. When she finally slipped back into bed, she forced herself to close her eyes. Images of Ethan kept flashing in her mind, but she whispered, "He's just a boy," until exhaustion finally carried her into shallow sleep. Ethan, too, drifted off some time later, though his dreams were tangled with images of the fire, of Claire's voice, of her kindness. The house was quiet, filled only with the soft sound of rain easing into silence. But even in their sleep, both carried the weight of what the night had stirred inside them, questions without answers, emotions without names. By morning, nothing outwardly had changed. The storm had passed, the sky cleared, and sunlight stretched gently across the curtains. Yet inside both of them, something had shifted. The night had planted a seed, a quiet awareness that neither of them could easily ignore. For Claire, it was the realization that she wasn't as closed off to life as she had thought, that she could still feel deeply, even unexpectedly. For Ethan, it was the memory of being truly seen, perhaps for the first time in a long time, and though both tried to push the feelings aside, they knew the truth. This night would stay with them forever, not because of what happened, but because of what was felt. The storm was gone when Claire woke. The rain that had poured all night was now only a memory. And sunlight slipped gently through the curtains, painting her room with gold. For a moment, she lay still, the quiet around her almost too calm compared to the restless thoughts that had kept her awake. She stretched, rubbed her eyes, and tried to steady herself. Morning had arrived, and with it came the need to face reality. She walked into the hallway, still in her robe, and stopped when she caught the sound of movement in the kitchen. A soft clatter of pans, the faint smell of something cooking. It was unexpected. Curiosity drew her forward. When she reached the doorway, the sight made her pause. Ethan stood at the stove, his hair messy from sleep, wearing the same t-shirt and sweatpants he had put on the night before. He was flipping pancakes, his movements clumsy but determined. He hadn't noticed her yet, and she watched quietly for a moment, a smile tugging at her lips. When he finally looked up and saw her, his face brightened with a grin that felt unguarded and pure. "Good morning," he said. "I thought I'd make breakfast. It's not perfect, but I wanted to try." Claire laughed softly, stepping into the room. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Ethan said, turning back to the pan. "But I wanted to. You've done so much for me. Last night meant more than you realize." Her heart skipped at his words. She walked closer, taking a seat at the table, watching him work. The kitchen filled with the smell of pancakes, warm and comforting. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had cooked for her. The simple act stirred something deep inside her, something she didn't want to name but couldn't ignore. Ethan brought over a plate with two uneven pancakes and set it in front of her. "See? Not great, but edible," Claire smiled, picking up her fork. "They look perfect." She took a bite, and though they were slightly undercooked, she said, honestly, delicious. Ethan sat across from her, watching her reaction with eager eyes. For a while, they ate in silence, sunlight streaming between them, making the morning feel brighter than it had in months. It wasn't about the food, it was about the moment, the small kindness of it, the thought that someone had cared enough to make her feel seen after a few bites. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression more serious. "I don't think I'll ever forget last night. You listened to me in a way no one else does. I didn't know how much I needed that." Claire set down her fork, her throat tightening. "I'm glad you felt that way. You're not alone, Ethan. Sometimes we all just need someone to understand us." His eyes softened as he looked at her. "You made me feel. Like I mattered. The weight of his words hung in the air. Claire felt tears threaten, but she blinked them back. She couldn't let emotions overwhelm her now. Instead, she gave a gentle smile. You do matter. More than you know. For a moment, neither moved. The sunlight, the quiet, the warmth in the air, it all felt fragile, like a glass that could shatter if touched too hard. Claire realized then that the unbelievable part of this visit wasn't anything dramatic or improper. It was this, the unexpected depth of connection between them, the way one night had shifted, how they saw themselves and each other. She thought about how lonely she had felt in recent years, how she had convinced herself her life had already passed its brightest days. And now here was Ethan, reminding her that even in ordinary moments, something powerful could awaken again hope, tenderness. The belief that she still mattered to Ethan broke the silence first. I wish I could stay longer. Being here feels different, like I can breathe. His words pierced her, but she held her voice steady. You'll always have a place here, Ethan. This house, this table, this space will always be open to you. He nodded slowly, absorbing her words as if they were a promise he wanted to carry with him. Then he gave her a smile that was both grateful and a little